afternoon. There's a quote that says, "You cannot make progress without making decisions." And truth is, if you don't make a decision, you still made a decision. Welcome to another Rare Leader Conversation. I am Tony Jalen, joined by the wonderful,
Danielle Jalen.
that's you, Danielle. And when we talk about rare leaders, we talk about a leader who's resourceful, adaptable, resilient, willing to engage with others. And there's numerous reasons why we do what we do, but one of them is to equip you with tools and resources to really for you to thrive personally and professionally. And today we're going to talk about decision making, because truth of the matter is we're going through a lot of decisions, aren't we, Danielle? As a our for those guys who've been following us, whether you're on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, our son graduates this year, actually next year, 2024. So that means he's a senior. And background on him, he plays volleyball, and he's also excels academically. Well, one of his goals is to play collegiately. And over the last few months, a lot of opportunities have already all of a sudden come to the forefront of him being able to play at the next level. So that involves making some decisions. Do you go visit a campus? Do you not visit a campus? Is that a school you want to look at? So today we're going to talk about decision making process, because I believe that if you have a process to make decisions, you'll also make better decisions. So we're going to go through 7 steps with you. And this is actually from University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. They came up with this decision-making process. So I can't say it's all my ideas. There's parts of it that is my ideas, but I think this is beneficial. So you're going to want to grab yourself a pen and paper. If you're having any challenges making decisions, if you ever feel like you're stuck and you're just sitting there not making decisions, tune in. This conversation's for you. So the first step is you got to identify the decision. You got to realize that you need to make a decision, because the worst place to be is not procrastination, but hesitation, in my experience. Because then you're thinking about that same thought for weeks. Like this decision we had to make to go to one of these volleyball camps Ezekiel was invited to. It was maybe 2-3 weeks ago he was invited. And we're still making a decision. And I'm not going to lie, it probably comes up for a thought of mine at least once a day. And they say 80% of your thoughts day to day are the same thoughts. Well, I can attest that study is true. Why is it important, Danielle, to realize, hey, you know what? I need to make a decision. And clearly defining the nature of the decision you must make. Why is that such an important step?
I think that the more that you obviously hesitate or procrastinate on making that decision is like thinking about it, is the amount of time that you are spending thinking about talking about it with somebody. And it just, the more time that passes, obviously your decision ends up being made for you if you miss the deadline of it. And then all of a sudden you're looking at possibly having regrets of not taking it more seriously. So I think there's the time that just passes that you lose.
And I think there's truth to what you just said, that if you don't make that decision, someone else is going to make that decision for you, or it could be time makes that decision for you and have time to make that decision. I'm guilty of that. That's why when I saw you, I told you I was going to marry you. You told me that I had to go ahead and make that decision quicker than I was like, oh, all right. Funny story behind that, folks, for another call of how that came about. So that's one, is you got to identify the decision. You realize that you got to make that decision, and you got to clearly define the nature of that decision you must make. The second one is you got to gather relevant information. I'm not saying for you to make haphazard decisions and, shoot first, then aim. You got to collect some of the important information before you make a decision, and like understand like what information is needed and what are some of the best sources to get the information. Would you say that this involves internal and external work, Danielle, in terms of gathering information?
Yeah, I think, when you're looking at what information you need, it's almost like setting goals and preparing yourself for possible obstacles that could come up in the way along to that goal. And I think this is the same thing in decision making is gathering information, like even information that you may not think is important could be a very important part of being able to make that decision.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like once you um, start gathering that information in step two, you start to in step three, you start to identify alternatives. You start to uncover like, oh, well, here's another option. Like for example, we initially was looking at one type of division type school. And all of a sudden I did more research. You're like, wait a second here. What if we went this route? Um, in step three, so step two, you got to gather the relevant information as it pertains to that decision. In step three, you got to identify the alternatives because, like, why? Like, why do you want to identify alternatives?
Oh, because there's obviously things that come up that may not be in your control. And you need to know, if this would be an issue, what other options do I have? Instead of just getting set on one specific way to go, no different. Like if you're driving and all of a sudden you run into construction or a car accident on the road, like what alternatives do I have to getting to from point A to point B if I need to be there in a certain time constraint?
Right. That's why Google gives you alternative routes. Because sometimes there's the short route and then there's the quickest route, right? Okay, so here's what we've done. All right, we identified the decision. We gathered some relevant information to make a intellectual some decision. We figured out there are alternatives, and now we got to weigh the evidence. That's step four. When I'm weighing evidence, I've got to write it all out, and I like whiteboards. I'm a big whiteboard person, and I think when you're weighing the evidence, what are some of the things that we should consider?
Well, one of the things I think is to have someone also looking at it with you because I think a lot of times we go into making a decision, we already have possibly in the back of our mind like the answer and conclusion we want to come to. And so we may look at the evidence and make it all in our favor of what we want that outcome to be. And so I think there also needs to be someone else included in that can play that little devil's advocate and throw the little wrenches in there to make you consider everything.
And that's a good point because there's sometimes those things like we want to do it, we want to make the decision to do it, and you know, yeah, I think having someone who's detached from the outcome involved is very important. And I think the other thing you got to ask yourself is you got to evaluate whether the need identified in step one, like identifying this decision, would be met or resolved through the use of one of those alternatives, right? Like, for example, Ezekiel for school, we asked him the question, okay, if you take volleyball out of the equation, would you still want to go to the school or not? You know, um, hey, this XYZ school may be offering you more dollars to be there versus the other school, but does it meet your overall wants and needs? Like, how do you want your college experience to be? What do you want to end up with? So those are other things you got to identify, but I think you've got to write it down because it's just in your head. Like Daniil said, you might put a beautiful story around it, and until you put it and make it real, it's not truly real. I think step five is then choose among the alternatives. So once you've weighed all the evidence, you're ready to select the alternative that's possibly could be even the better option for you. It may be a combination of the two, but your choice in quote unquote in step five, well, actually may be the same. You may actually find those alternatives and like, you know what? That first decision was still the best decision. Like for me, Marrying you is still the best decision. There's a whole story on that, folks. Like, Neil came in my life and um, came to the front door, literally. And there's other alternatives. And then I said, I'm gonna say no. Here's the one I want. So I think here's the next step. So you got it all on paper now. So let's go through the steps again. You identify the decision, you gather relevant information, you identified the alternatives, you weighed the evidence, and you chose among the alternatives, and then now you gotta take action. You're ready to take some positive action by beginning to implement the alternative you chose, quote unquote, in step 5. Because I think, I don't know, Danielle, like the initial decision we want to make, and if we've actually gone through this process of decision making, how often do you think that we actually stick to that initial decision, you think?
I think, I mean, I think when you know that you've done your job of walking through everything and you've come to the decision, I think that you're more at peace with it. So I think that I don't know that I could put a percentage on the initial decision or not, because I think no matter what, we're always going to be led to the right decision if we're doing the stuff to help us get there.
Right. And I think after you make that decision now, that's where the final step comes into play. You got to actually review your decision and its consequences. Like, considering the results of your decision and evaluating whether or not it actually resolved the need you identified in step 1. You see it happen. It's called the portal for college athletes. We got to go to a whole new different school and for XYZ things. And I think there's times when I've looked at different decisions I've made that when I go back to the process and evaluate the decision I made, um, I may have to actually go back through certain parts of the steps of the process and say, I may have missed this, and that's okay, right? You know, we either win or we learn, and I think it's sometimes in importance, like, you know what? Okay, it may not have worked out we wanted to make out. And like we were talking to one of the coaches, which we really appreciate from one of the colleges. He's like, listen, I get it. You may choose a different college, but let's at least keep the door open because you might decide, like, you know what? I don't want to do that. We saw this with one of the girls players who went to a very large school, Notre Dame, years ago, and said, it's a prestige school, it's great, and landed up coming locally to play Marquette and is having a fantastic there at Marquette. So there you guys go. 7 steps to decision making. Number 1, identify a decision. 2, gather the information. 3, identify the alternatives. 4, weigh the evidence. 5, choose among the alternatives once you weighed all the evidence. 6, take action. And 7, review the decision and its consequences. I think sometimes when you have a process, it takes the emotion out of the process. You think?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, when we look back on decisions we've made, if we've made them emotionally, we probably haven't gone through all the proper channels to get to that decision. And a lot of times we're disappointed because we did base it on emotion versus, logical, realistic steps that need to be taken. And I think that the decisions that you're nervous about should cause you to be nervous because they may be big life altering decisions you have to make.
Yeah. And I think too is that the times which I don't say regretted the decision, just thinking, man, I could have made a different decision is because the times I didn't really just think it through and like really be honest with myself and then ask myself, okay, if I make that decision, am I willing to go and live with those consequences? Like that's a tough question right there to ask because I think in some ways we may not know all the time what the consequences may be, But we really sit down like, hey, and actually not ignore it, but actually walk through it. Because I know there's times in which I've ignored it. And even though I knew I should have really think this through, but I didn't. And I'm like, okay, I go and make that purchase, whatever it may be. And then you're going, gosh, why did I just do that? Buyer's remorse, they call that in sales. When you put it on paper, it becomes real. If it's not documented, it doesn't exist. And I think like what you said, Danielle, is like, we do a lot of things based on our emotions. We go by feelings sometimes. And I don't know if that's always the right thing to do. Because,
4-pack of Crumbl cookies instead of an individual cookie.
yeah, for those of you guys who are keeping track, okay, I did not realize this until Danielle pointed this out. Crumbl cookies, you guys may have heard of them. They're like a fast-growing cookie bakery brand. And I remember looking at one of the things on the wall, and it said calories on their billboard. I don't know, 240 calories. I'm like, well, that's not bad. Really? I thought these be. I literally thought this, no joke. I literally thought that it was really only 240 calories. Even though my mind said, gosh, that's a big, I don't know how that can be only 240 calories. I mean, that's as much as a Snickers bar. And then I can't remember how this happened.
The little asterisk at the end.
Well, I don't remember seeing that little asterisk though. Just to let you know, I don't remember seeing it. And we were looking online or something. You said something about 700, 800 calories. I'm like, really? And I looked online with my son, and I'm like, holy crap, that's like 800 calories for one of these things. And I remember by looking and actually following the process subconsciously, identifying my decision, gather relevant information, identify the alternatives, weigh the evidence, and choose among the alternatives, and then take action. I did not eat a full cookie. Now, I'm not going to lie, that night I had a little piece of the Oreo one, just a little tiny piece. Because I thought that little tiny piece is still 100 calories. But I went through a decision-making process on it. So, I hope this was helpful for all you guys who are watching today. If you did find it helpful, please do share this. Again, I found it on, just do a Google search, decision making, UMass comes up. But our goal is to add value to you, to inspire you, to empower you to be your best self. So Danielle, what would you be some final thoughts that you would like to leave with when it comes to decision making?
Well, I think whenever you're looking at a decision, that it's important to walk through and really think out what possible options that you have for it. And I know we talked about emotions and making rash decisions and not making decisions at all. And then looking back and thinking about, what could I have done differently? You learn or you win, and that's just the biggest part of all decisions that are being made.
Yeah, so true. And I'll leave you guys with this thought. This is some deep thinking right now with Tony. If you chase two rabbits, both will escape. Unless you chase them into a culvert. But and the point of that and like anecdote is that two rabbits can typically go in two different directions. If you try to chase them both, you're not going to catch either of them. That's why you simply just got to make a decision. Make a decision, and there's going to be a consequence with whatever decision you make. And by the way, consequences are not always bad, by the way. They can be good. Like me making a decision not to eat that whole Crumbl cookie that night. That was a good decision. I was going to go ahead and throw you underneath the bus, but I'm not going to. We appreciate you guys again. See you again next week as we have another discussion. And, if there's something that you want us to really talk about that you may have heard on one of our talks and triggered some thoughts, you're like, you know what, can you guys further expound on that? Please do send us a message. We have these calls. Sometimes it's just us talking. We're going through a decision-making process. We're letting you live it with us. And you'll find out, probably by December what college we decide, or Ezekiel decided to go to, I should say. Until then, go ahead and be a rare leader. Onward and up.